Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reality Plus Us. I'm Helen Papagiannis, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing Apple Vision Pro and the future of spatial computing. Now, it dawned on me that we already had the perfect guest for today's topic right under our noses. Avi Bar-Zeev has been building immersive worlds and spatial computing experiences for over 30 years. His impressive bio includes building virtual reality rides at Disney in the 90s. He co-invented the Microsoft HoloLens, and most recently, he worked at Apple on the Vision Pro. It is with great pleasure that I welcome my dear friend, who also happens to be my co-host, Avi Bar-Zeev. Welcome to your own show, Avi.
Thank you for inviting me to a show that I'm already on. But it made sense that I think we have a lot to talk about today. And so we'll do our best, and I'll try to say whatever I can say within the limits of my NDA about the Apple Vision Pro and about the future in general.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's fun to try something a little bit different. It made perfect sense. Today, you're in the hot seat. So, I absolutely love learning from you. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion. So let's begin by, first off, a massive congrats to you and the entire Apple team on Vision Pro. It really is a technological marvel, and it represents an entire new product category for Apple under the Vision category, and it really enhances and extends the existing ecosystem. So I can't wait to see how that's going to continue to develop. So let's start off by having you tell us about your role at Apple and some of the process behind how Vision Pro came to be.
Sure. So there's some things I can't say. That Apple would be upset with me if I gave away the internal process or a number of people that worked on it or anything, or even technically when it started. But I can tell you when I joined Apple, that's right on my resume, that I joined in 2016, and I was hired directly into a role whose title is Senior Manager for Experience Prototyping. And so what you do in general, I'm not going to be totally specific about Apple, but what that job is in general is to come in and lead a team of expert prototypers to go figure out the future. So in big companies, before you go build a product, you want to prototype it. You want to try everything that you might try in reality and see if it's good before you go spend lots and lots of money on it. And I won't even say how much money, but it's a lot. And so you want to do that cheaply. And so my team often comes in and we build prototypes. And the most important thing about prototypes for XR is that they're experiential, that you can try them, because nobody knows what it's going to be like. You can't make a keynote deck to say, here's what we're going to do, because nobody knows what it's going to be like unless you actually experience it. So we do our best to show people what that would be like using anything, using custom hardware, using off-the-shelf hardware. And one of the most important parts of this is to be able to make these demos for the decision makers of the project, the stakeholders, so that they can come in and go, okay, wow, I get it. This is what we need to build. And hopefully we've seen a bunch of other things that we don't need to build that are not where we want to go. So we have a clear definition of what's in scope and what's out of scope and why. And everybody hopefully is on the same page from that process. There's more to it, but that's the short version.
Okay, well, before we get into the long version, let's back up and talk about the definition of spatial computing. So this is a term that's been around, and there's been some debate about its history. And this is a term that Apple is using to describe Vision Pro as well as their apps. There's, spatial computing apps. So let's hear from you. What is the definition of spatial computing? And tell us a little bit about its history.
Sure. So the simplest definition of spatial computing is, normally, at least for the last 50 years, our interactions with the computer have been us on this side of the glass and the computer on the other side of the glass. And we use something like a mouse or a keyboard to tell the computer on the other side of the glass what we want. And it tries to show us what's going on. So that's typical desktop computing that we're all used to. Spatial computing removes the glass. Spatial computing says, let's have the computer exist in the same space that we're existing in, right? So it lives in the world with us in a sense. And it can interact in the world with us. So it has to learn. The computer has to learn about reality. It has to learn about humans. It has to learn about spaces. It has to learn about things. And so when the computer understands that, now we can interact more naturally with everything within arm's reach or within sight. And that's effectively what spatial computing is. Now, it started out a little different. So in the 80s, people in geographic information systems used the term spatial computing to think about let's do computation on maps. Let's take geospatial information and compute on it. And today, that's also true, but it's also much more true that it happens at the human scale, at arm's length versus the entire world or an entire city or country. And so we use the same term to imply that we're doing something magical with information around us, and not just the world as a map itself. And that use of it, I can trace back to 1992 in a startup that I was in. I don't think I coined it. I'm pretty sure I didn't, but we used it. And I think my boss, Bob Jacobson, remembers it being used at the Human Interface Technology Lab a little bit before that as well. But I do have artifacts from then that say spatial computing, and that kind of proves that we were, at the time on the cutting edge of this idea. I'm super glad, though, that Apple picked it up and went with it. I don't think that I was the one that convinced them to do it. I'm pretty sure I didn't have any impact on the branding of what they're doing. But on the other hand, many of us tried to use the correct terms for things and we didn't try to jargonize things and market them early. We tried to use correct scientific words like copresence. People hopefully know what that means, or if not, we can explain it easily. And so I'm really kind of glad that we have a term now that isn't as abused as the metaverse or even AR and MR are abused with different meanings right now. This is one I think can stick, and I think it's hopefully really clear what it is.
Yeah, and it seems like an integral part to that definition of spatial computing is the human and a human's body, correct?
Yeah, totally. And you and I, and the title of your book especially gets to this, is that the goal is not augmenting the world. The goal is augmenting humanity. The goal is augmenting ourselves, giving ourselves new superpowers in some ways, but new perceptions, new abilities, and ideally new abilities to interact with each other and with information and the world. So it's not so much that the world is augmented, as you would always say. It's really that we become better as a result of all this technology.
Exactly, and that it extends our humanity, and we're both on the same page of that for sure. The other thing I think about also is when we're talking about the body and natural user interfaces or natural user input is Steve Mann's work, his pioneering work. Steve Mann, father of wearable computing, doing really, really early work, even as far back as the 70s. And so with Steve, he's often talked about how over time, for decades that as humans, we have wrapped ourselves around the computer. We have contorted our bodies around the computer. And he describes this as almost as a pretzel metaphor. And this is something actually I wrote an article about for the World Economic Forum on the future of spatial computing. And so moving away from this idea of contorting and wrapping ourselves around the computer to this idea that the computer wraps around us. Right. And so he's been working on wearable computing again since the 70s. This is something you've been working on for a very long time, since the 90s. And one of the true magical features I think about Vision Pro is the natural user interface. So the ability to just look at something and to use gesture to select something. And it almost has this kind of mind reading effect. Talk to us about this really special feature.
Yeah, it's really hard to get right. So I'll try to describe when it's done well, it feels magical. It feels like you have Jedi mind powers, that you can look at an object and tap your fingers and it flies into your hands, and you can look somewhere else in the room and let go of it and it flies to wherever you're looking. It feels like, how did that happen? It must have been reading my mind. But if you look at the technology behind it, show you real quick, I can't get into all the details, but there's a lot going on in order to get eye tracking to be this good on the Apple Vision Pro. And I'd say almost nothing out there does as good of a job because the requirements are so high. So you can see multiple cameras, multiple LED glints, and a ton of work. I can't say how much went into making this as good as it is. And the calibration especially. Apple did a really amazing job with the calibration experience to make that as simple as possible. Because I'll tell you, if you try eye tracking and you get it wrong, it's worse than anything else. But if you get it right, it's better than anything else. And in fact, probably better even than the mouse at this point. I think we were almost ready to ditch the mouse in many circumstances and move on to gestures and eyes and voice as a much more natural interface paradigm. And it's something I've been pushing for a long, long time. Yeah. I think even the original HoloLens, one of the reasons that we pursued eye tracking was to try to do this, but it was never good enough to be able to ditch other kinds of gestures. But that was, I think, the goal. At least it was my goal in helping to start that project.
Yeah. And, you wrote an article several years ago. It was for Vice, also on your Medium page. We can link it to it, called Eyes Are the Prize, right? Mm-hmm. And so talk to us also a little bit about some of the privacy issues around eye tracking. Now, when it's used well, it can really help to make our lives better and enhance the activity and immersion that we're in. But there's also, I guess, a darker side. I know ethics are very important to you. So maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the key ideas in that article.
Yeah. So I wrote the article shortly after I left Apple. And when you work at a big company, you can't talk publicly about things. And I was still very careful not to say anything about secret projects. But I had gained a lot of experience with eye tracking in the course of my time there, and also filed a bunch of patents on some pretty amazing things that you can do. So I'm very much positive about the benefits of eye tracking, but I also wanted to warn people about the cautions that if you have another company, and I think Apple really did the right thing in terms of security and how well this is secured. Yeah. But another company might just look at this and go, oh, we need eye tracking too. So we're just going to go add it, but they won't add any of the security mechanisms that you also need. And here's what can go wrong briefly when you don't have secure eye tracking. So your eyes can be used to diagnose a lot of conditions already. So you're talking about third parties being able to make medical diagnosis about people just by getting your data. And there are companies out there that are willy-nilly letting people have access to your data. They really are not protecting your data in any significant way. And so there's a lot of potential concerns that can happen of people being denied employment because maybe the employer can go look them up and find out that they have a certain condition. But the most concerning abuse of this, of many, is that we're all subject to manipulation. And so just like any of us can go to a magic show and be amazed at the sleight of hand by a magician, there are psychological tricks, many of which will be better with eye tracking, where we can tell what you're paying attention to and change something in the world that you're not looking at, flip it to become something else, and start doing experiments on you so that by the time you're done, after a few minutes of this, we will have mapped your reaction space in such a way that we can tell what kind of products you like, what your sexual orientation is, what things get you excited and emotional in a positive way and in a negative way. And that stuff is all incredibly useful for exploitation in the form of advertising. So if advertising becomes this tight loop of interaction using eye tracking in order to change the world and map you psychologically, we become pretty much the victims of that exploitation. It's very hard to put a good spin on that because the companies that are doling out the ads can kind of do whatever they want at that point. They pretty much own our attention and they can push our buttons. So long story short, if you're going to go use a device that has eye tracking, make sure they've done the security work to make sure that even they can't use it, that the data is thrown away or kept on the device in an encrypted way. And then the one instance where you really want to send eye tracking data over a network is when you have avatars, when you're doing copresence with other people. But even that can be protected in a way such that no one else can see the data. Only your friends can see your eyes, but third parties would get gibberish or some generic information instead of seeing what your eyes are actually doing.
Right. Yeah. There was one line in that article where I remember you wrote, I have it here, is the eye tracking represents an unconscious like button for everything, right?
Yeah, and especially if you use the pupil. So it turns out that one of the things we figured out was that your pupils will dilate when you're interested in something, and they'll constrict when you're not interested. And also it happens in anticipation. So as an early warning sign of what you might be about to do, you can look at the pupils to tell if you're interested or eager about something. Kind of like in Blade Runner, remember the Voight-Kampff test?
Right.
It's testing, for androids, for artificial people. It probably would be a better test of sociopaths because you could actually gauge people's emotional engagement from the eyes directly. And it turns out it's a really good signal if you're trying to make a user interface like what Apple's showing with their spatial computing metaphors. It's a really good signal for telling what you're focusing on and what you're interested in so that they could minimize distractions and help you, hopefully. But again, all the things that have positive uses can have negative uses that could be abused in the wrong hands. So we have to be super careful.
Yeah, you bet. And the XR Guild is a great place to go for resources and xrguild.org, right?
.org, yes.
Yeah.
And we'll put up the links for that as well. And we encourage people, if you haven't heard about it, I'll just tell you about it real quickly, I guess. So we encourage people to join the XR Guild who are professionals in the space. They may call themselves spatial computing professionals or XR or metaverse or even AI. All those things intersect in a place where we need better ethics. And if you're a doctor or a journalist or even a lawyer, you will have gotten ethics training as part of your degree at some point along the way. But for computer science, for some reason, that never happened. It even happens in civil engineering, but not in this kind of engineering. And so we need to bring that back. We need to make sure that we have ethics. And for the people who are out of school, we need to add it as adult education. For people who are in school, there need to be programs to teach this. And we see what happens when you don't have ethics. You have, move fast and break things, and people wind up getting hurt before the situations get fixed. Many of the situations where things go wrong can be anticipated because they've gone wrong before. We have history to look at to see where things break. And we are really derelict if we make the same mistake twice, right? If we haven't learned from our past mistakes, we can do better. And the whole thesis of the XR Guild is that if we get the people working in this space to pay more attention to what's happened before and to the learnings and to all the information that we have, then we can all do a better job as builders as well, because we want everybody to love what we build. We hate it when things don't turn out well. So we want to help. We want to help make that better.
Excellent. So yes, go to xrguild.org for more. So it's called the Apple Vision Pro, but it's not all about vision. Talk to us a little bit about some of the other features like spatial audio.
Yeah, if you talk to anybody who works on audio for a living, they'll tell you the common saying is audio is at least 50% of the end experience, but usually only 10% of the budget, and often comes in at the last minute. I can tell you this, that audio is front and center in the Apple Vision Pro, even though it's called Vision. I think that the technology that Apple has shown publicly is pretty amazing. They're doing what they're calling audio ray tracing, which is kind of the analog of in the visual domain of really high quality photorealistic rendering. That's being done in the audio space, and it really does matter. Very few companies are doing this. A lot of people have what they call spatial audio, but the simplest version that they show you is just they pan the sounds left and right in your ears, so it might sound like the sound is more on the left or more on the right, but that's not correct. What you want to do is, for example, there's a thing called side tone. So if you're standing in a virtual cathedral, you want to hear your own voice with that reverb, with the echo that sounds like you're in a cathedral. And that's what makes it real. That's what sells it to your brain more than almost anything else, more than the visuals even, I think, is that you're somewhere else because it sounds like somewhere else. But also normally every day when we're doing any kind of spatial computing task in our own space, we want the virtual things to sound like they're real in our space as well. So by mapping the room and by being able to ray trace the audio of the actual space we're in, we can make virtual things seem much more realistic and much more believable. And that's going to have a huge impact when we have people teleporting into our spaces, as the future of spatial computing promises, that we're going to have, our friends and our coworkers or whatever co-inhabiting spaces together. They need to sound real as well. And one of the most important qualities there is that when they speak, the sound has to come out of their mouth, which happens in real life. But when you put on a pair of headphones, think about this. Whenever you talk on the phone or you listen to music, it often sounds like the sound is coming from inside your head. What you really want is for that sound to be coming from the mouth of the person you're talking to. And that's one of the things that makes it totally believable. So anyway, spatial audio in a nutshell is the most undersold, but probably most important piece of all of this, in addition to visuals and everything else. And the Vision Pro really nails it. Even with open ear speakers, it's really hard to do. There's a few headsets that have done this right. HoloLens, I think, did a pretty good job on spatial audio, but the Apple Vision Pro, it takes it to the next level and allows you to hear the real world as well. So it's not occluding your world like headphones would be if you were wearing those.
Yeah. It really does help to heighten immersion, heighten presence, all those things that you were mentioning. Something else that you mentioned was about co-inhabiting spaces together. So let's talk a little bit about Copresence. I know you wanted to define what that was for all of us. And let's talk about the possibilities on Apple Vision Pro. We've seen glimpses of it with SharePlay. There is also a demo going around right now from Campfire showing the possibility to collaborate using Vision Pro. So So talk to us a little bit about that, about cohabiting spaces together and what that looks like.
Yeah, and I should mention that I'm an advisor at Campfire as well, so I'm not totally neutral in this. But so copresence, if I had to give a short definition, is first presence. Let's start with that.
Yes.
Presence is the feeling that you're somewhere. So right now I have real presence in my own office. I feel like I'm here. If I were to put on a virtual reality headset, I might feel like I was somewhere else. So to the degree that I feel like I'm in the space that it seems like I'm in, that's presence. Copresence is that same feeling, but that the other people are also there with you and that they're real, that they're not just non-player characters or AIs or anything else you might think about, but that they're real humans. And it requires good spatial audio is one of those things. It also requires some representation of other people, but not always photorealistic. This is where sometimes we go wrong. And I've done many, many demos in companies where the avatars look like they're just made of stone, right? They're not realistic in the sense that video is realistic, but they're highly effective because they seem to move with the same mannerisms of the people. And to some degree, lower fidelity is better. It's one of the reasons that things like Rec Room and Roblox have been so successful, because if you try to make something photorealistic and fail, and it somehow seems weird or creepy, that does more damage than just keeping it cartoony in the first place. On the other hand, if I want to talk to my spouse or my boss about something serious, I probably don't want to be a Lego character for that conversation, because it's fun for play, but it's not going to be serious enough for work. So we need to strike a balance. And Apple has done their best with personas, and it's a really hard problem. They're trying to capture us photorealistically and doing their best and sort of blurring the edges of where it doesn't look as good and trying to make the parts that work well front and center. But it's not perfect yet there. And I don't think anybody there would say it's perfect yet either. But the question is it good enough? Is it good enough yet to have conversations with people, serious conversations in a form of what they call persona, other people call avatar. I actually would prefer persona, by the way, just because the word avatar has been culturally misappropriated, and eventually at some point people are going to want their word back, and I think we just shouldn't rely on that too much. But in any event, it's super important to get that right. What is less important is we don't have to put on a VR headset and all feel like we've teleported to some distant location in order to have a good conversation or a good meeting. It can take place in your own space, in your own office, and that's where the more augmented reality side of the spectrum makes sense, right? When you're seeing more and more of your own real space, all you really need to do is bring the other people in a compelling way, so that they can inhabit your space with you. And from their perspective, they see themselves in their own space as well, and they see you teleporting in. So we've seen many examples of this. We've seen with the HoloLens, Sharamazadi worked on holoportation. That was a pretty good attempt using multiple Kinect cameras. That stuff goes way, way back. And I think what we're going to find is there's going to be two competing ways to do this, maybe three. One, low fidelity avatars always works. We know that. The second is super high-end capture, and the best version of that we've seen, at least as a research project, is the codec avatars that Meta's shown. They don't actually run on their hardware. You can't get them, but as a research project, it looks pretty amazing. Not quite perfect yet, though. Like, I have to say, like, when you watch the interview between Mark Zuckerberg and Lex Friedman, when they're both being codec avatars, first of all, no, it's not running on the headset. It's running off of a very powerful computer that's connected to it. But second is, both of those guys are not the most affective people. They're a little bit robotic in their mannerisms. And so that technology may or may not work for people who have high affect, people whose eyebrows move a lot, whose faces change a lot as they talk, and they're very good at emoting. I don't think we're quite there yet where we could capture all the nuances of their performance to a degree that really will be useful. So the other end of the spectrum that I really like is one where we don't try to recreate us as avatars or personas, but we actually use video to try to represent us as a 3D video. So holographic telepresence is more the term that I would use there. And that's something that I've worked on for a long time. I mean, I have recordings going back, to the 2009, I think we did this demo here, where all of a sudden I'm stepping into the right range and you can see me in 3D, not quite right from the sides, but you can see what it looks like to be able to virtually move the camera around and be able to make eye contact because we're seeing 3D video instead of the normal zoom, type or recording like we're doing here, 2D video. So you have the ability to move your head from side to side and see a different aspect of the people. I've done lots of experiments with that, and when it's done well, it's really amazing. But here's the problem. Well, as soon as you put a headset on and it's occluding your face, you can't just capture us from an external video like we're doing here. So the reason that the Apple Vision Pro is doing what it's doing is to use its own sensors to try to fill in the gaps, to fill in the things that you can't see from the outside. And it's doing a reasonably good job at it, but so far nothing is quite perfect yet.
Yeah. So a couple of things that you mentioned there I think a lot about the future of memories as well. And so avatars and representing ourselves is kind of the beginning of representing humans in 3D spaces. But then also I think about the spatial memories on Vision Pro. You mentioned, and right now they're stereoscopic. And you mentioned Shram Azadi's work, holoportation from Microsoft Research, doing some really wonderful work around being able to use, volumetric capture to capture and store and relive memories from multiple perspectives, from multiple angles, even being able to shrink those down into the miniature. And the other thing I was thinking about too is there's a scene in Ready Player One in the film, in the kind of the holiday journals archive, where you can go in and see and relive and watch these memories, and they are volumetric, and so you're able to see them from multiple angles, replay things. And the way that they were created was here it says they were meticulously assembled from personal photographs, old video recordings, surveillance, and even nanny cams, and all rendered into this kind of 3D virtual experience. And so I think of what the future might look like, and you and I have talked before about Gaussian splats and NeRFs and volumetric capture. And so right now, the spatial memories in Vision Pro are stereoscopic, and they're wonderful. They're magical. And Scott Stein, who was our guest on the last episode, did some really in-depth reviews of them, and feeling like he could just kind of like crawl in over those fuzzy edges back into those memories. And so as we look to the future, as Avi Bar-Zeev, not as a representative of Apple, how do you see this future of spatial memories and memories in general and kind of digital realms evolving? What does that look like?
Yeah, so thank you for saying that. I'm going to be doubly clear that so I'm not revealing any kind of secret future roadmap for Apple or anything. I'm talking generically about the field and what is going to happen in the field here. So yes, today the standard is stereoscopic. There's sort of two really great formats that people are using today. One is the spherical video format, right, which is you're in the equivalent of the Las Vegas sphere of a large wraparound screen with relatively high resolution. And you can feel immersed in that. So you can take your panoramas, your vacation photos, and look around them as if you were standing there. But you'll start to notice, the resolution probably isn't quite high enough yet. Like we need to probably double or quadruple the resolution before those are indistinguishable from the actual place. They're also not videos yet, right? There's companies that specialized in capturing spherical panoramic videos. That takes a lot of data, to push, you're not, 8K pixels is not enough. You're talking 48K pixels, like lots and lots of pixels that we don't quite have the capacity for yet. So that's one approach people are taking, and it's good. Another approach is stereoscopic rendering, which is a unique image for our left eye, a unique image for the right eye. And that's why you need two cameras, two lenses. And if we take the images the right way, we can re-experience those as spatial memories, which is what Apple calls it, and other people I think too as well. And they feel real. But there's one artifact, which is as you move your head around, you don't get a different perspective. So in a true 3D capture, more volumetric capture, you would be able to move your head left and right, and the world would stay locked in space. It wouldn't float with you. It can be a little nauseating sometimes if you try to move too much and you can't get a new perspective. And so this is the state of the art, where we want to go in the future. And you mentioned volumetric rendering. There was a lot of work done at USC. Paul Bevick did these really amazing light stage captures where they would put cameras all around you in a 360 or at least 180 degree hemisphere with lights that could capture you correct lighting from all angles. And the result was pretty amazing. But again, too much data, too heavy. And it wasn't great for necessarily shooting outdoors, right? You had to be in this special stage to be captured. So we still need advances to be able to get to what we might call volumetric capture, something I'm super interested in, but we're not there yet. And at the end of the day, what we'll be able to do very simply is, if you use a device to do a volumetric capture, you're going to be able to capture a video of your loved one sitting on the couch. And when you play it back, you're going to be able to walk around that couch and see them from all sorts of angles, not just the perspective that was captured originally in a stereo pair. Yeah, exactly. And at that point, it's going to be much less nauseating. Because I'll tell you this, that somebody who's easily nauseated, the one thing you don't want to do with your Apple Vision Pro is capture spatial memories while moving and then replay them, because they will feel so real that you will feel like that's wrong, and I need to go find a sink right now. So, you really want to be careful about that. But once we get to volumetric capture, I think that we'll be able to walk around and change our perspective really well. It's been held back by a lot of things. The data size has been one of those things that's constrained it, but also, when you have multiple cameras capturing us, they tend to wash out the highlights, what you would call what we in the graphics world would call the specular reflections, because the specular reflections are view dependent. They're different from different angles. So if you combine all those views, you've lost it. And that's what the magic of Gaussian splatting is. What you would notice about looking at any Gaussian splat is that the highlights, those specular reflections, move with your eyes correctly, because they're combining a whole bunch of views of the scene in a way that is compelling. So the future is, we've got to get something like Gaussian splats captured by two or more cameras, some machine learning in the middle of that. And at the end of the day, we should be able to walk around these scenes and see them from any angle. And we'll get there. For today, the state of the art is like what Campfire is doing, as you said before, and they're reconstructing a 3D scene from models and then representing people abstractly as even simplistic avatars, just floating heads and hands. But that's kind of like the state of the art today, where we are. We still have a few years to go, I think, before we get to this next most powerful set of technologies.
Yeah, absolutely, and a lot of magic to come, I think. Let's go back in time a little bit. Speaking of magic, let's go back to your time at Disney. And you worked on the very popular Aladdin Magic Carpet Ride. And I was going through some of the kind of early SIGGRAPH proceedings. So I came across this paper from '96, and it was called Disney's Aladdin: First Steps Toward Storytelling in Virtual Reality. In the kind of the summary of the piece, it says, unlike most existing work on VR, which has focused on hardware and system software, we assumed high fidelity and focused on using VR as a new medium to tell stories. And there was an emphasis on this point here. This is not a systems implementation paper. We describe the hardware and software only as context for describing the guest experience. And so this is a kind of a radical idea. 96, really, you're looking at storytelling and kind of the magic behind the experience. And so I was very lucky to be part, during my graduate work in Toronto at York University, to be part of an augmented reality lab focused on storytelling. And we were based in the Faculty of Fine Arts Department of Film, and it was a lab led by Dr. Caitlin Fisher, my incredible, inspiring mentor. And so we were focused on storytelling as well, right? And this was 2005. Also pretty radical, right? At that time, augmented reality was heavily focused on computer vision. And here we were, this little lab, small team in the Faculty of Fine Arts focused on storytelling. So we were hardware and software agnostic. And at that time, this stuff wasn't in textbooks, right? So for me, it was really important to experience it firsthand. So I went to different labs around the world. I went to Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, places where this was happening, to experience it firsthand. And at these labs and at different conferences, I would often be asked, so what aspect of augmented reality does your lab focus on? Is it computer vision, perhaps haptics, outdoor experiences? And I would just say storytelling. And I would be met by this kind of blank stare and like, wait, what do you mean storytelling, right? Because it was back then really kind of heavy on the technological side of things, right? And so here we were focused on exploring this wonderful world of storytelling and content. And so I was excited to go back and see that article from SIGGRAPH where you were saying the same thing about VR. You're really interested in the storytelling and the magic, and it wasn't so much about the hardware or the software or the technology, really. It was about the guest experience at Disney. So maybe tell us a little bit about that time and that really wonderful, magical experience you created.
Oh, you bet. I'm gonna show a photo here. This is us around 1994. That I'm in the back row there, center of the back row. You can barely see me. And this was my first really important job after college. I was in a startup before this that ran out of money and failed. Actually, it was important, but it didn't succeed. It was important because it helped me get this Disney job by doing some cool demos. And I got noticed and I got put on this project down in Glendale, actually, and it was pretty amazing. I'll show the output again. Unfortunately, this is a little bit too low resolution compared to today for people to see. But what we did was we recreated that first little bit is sort of what our lab looked like, and then we had this stage where we had multiple headsets that 4 people could ride at a time and go through the world of Aladdin. And you can't see it from the video, but the fidelity was really high. It was only VGA resolution, but you couldn't see any pixels in this display, kind of like the Apple Vision Pro, that there was no screen door effect. And so it was this beautiful, bright display, and you controlled it. You flew around on a magic carpet through the virtual city of Agrabah, and were able to fly wherever you want. And what was important about that was we were trying to figure out a new kind of storytelling that would happen in the future. So the best way to think about this project is Disney was willing to pay $20 million or whatever it was back then to buy really expensive hardware. Like this is Silicon Graphics reality engine machines were $500,000, $1 million each. So you're paying a lot of money practically, but you're buying a time machine effectively to see what the future is going to be like. And so we were able to peer 10, 20 years into the future of when people had Xbox 360s or whatever with similar hardware. Probably the Xbox 360 probably has more power than a Silicon Graphics did back then. But we got to try things. We got to try what is it like to be in the middle of a story when the characters are all telling stories around you, but you don't have to listen to them. So we actually had to invent technologies that would encourage the guests who are not movie directors. They don't know what the story is ahead of time. And so we have to encourage them to do things that will give them a better outcome as far as the story goes. Those are all techniques that games have used since then in recent years, massive multiplayer games in terms of hints and clues. And we even invented a kind of a cartoon gravity that would pull you slowly in towards a character if they had something important to say.
Nice.
So, but you could always pull away and fly away, but you would be drawn to them almost magnetically if you weren't trying very hard. And look, it was new to everybody. I've had so many people come up to me over the years saying that was the first thing they ever saw in VR, and it got them started on a 20-year career in VR. I'm like, yeah, sort of me too. I mean, that was the beginning of my career as my first big project. And it was amazing what you could do when you put a talented group of people together and give them a budget to do something real. That was super fun. And I owe a lot to really having started out with something that profound early on in my career. And I've been super lucky to have found that.
Oh, that's amazing. And I love seeing the footage of it. It is just so cool, Avi. You're so cool, Avi. The other thing that I loved about that experience too was that it seemed like there were multiple iterations of it, but it seemed like it also, so we've been talking about so far, we've talked about vision, we've talked about audio. And so in Augmented Human, there's a chapter dedicated to each of the senses and what's possible. And so you also used in that ride, there was wind. So I guess you tried to create a little bit of tactile sensation, right? And so you used a fan.
There's more than wind.
I know. And there was not taste, not yet. No. There was a smell, right? And so
I read
that as you were like flying by the different food stands, there was a spray kind of, I think, in the maybe wind machine that just kind of wafted that scent to your nose to enhance that immersion, right? But tell me more about that. Tell me more about the different senses that were at play.
Well, I mean, so Disney Imagineering is the masters at storytelling, right?
Yes.
Some of the things they do in the physical theme parks is as you walk down Main Street, there's a few tricks being played on you in a pleasant way. One is the smells. They are pumping out the smells of popcorn and cotton candy so that you always feel nostalgic when you smell those things. You're like, okay, brings back memories of any place. Even the last time you were at Disney, it brings back memories of having a good time. So they're already setting the stage. And then there's other effects they take advantage of, like the doorway effect. When you go to new lands, you always go through some sort of a portal or doorway that reveals itself that causes you to have this sense of awe, and because you forget what you were thinking about and you start in a whole new place. So they're masters of storytelling. And yes, the senses, all the other senses are super important as well. So I was not on the project at the time, but yeah, I did hear about them being able to do additional scent. The wind thing is something I used on the very first demo we built for the startup that failed. We had wind on your face because you're supposed to be in a hot air balloon ride, virtually flying over the pyramids. And yeah, of course there's going to be wind in your face. That's one of the things that sells it besides the audio and the visuals. The smells also sell it. And I'll give you one more. We prototyped a ride called the Virtual Jungle Cruise. So you're in a rubber raft. You're in a physical rubber raft, but it's on a motion base. So the raft is moving up and down with the simulated water. And you have an oar and you're steering the boat. 4 people in the same boat can steer. That's a super fascinating problem to try to solve because you can't put 4 steering wheels on a car, but you can't even put 2, but you could have 4 people try to row together. And that was a really fun experience. I had the pleasure of having the controls for the water squirter. So you want to be able to actually spray water on people when they get splashed in a whitewater ride. So I had Michael Eisner testing out this ride, and I had the button that got to spray water on Michael Eisner before we had the whole thing hooked up. So that was super fun. And lots of those sensory things. You get those when you go through any of the dark rides, whether it's a virtual one, like Star Tours or whatever the replacements are, the Star Wars versions. You'll get the feelings of motion from the motion bases, but you'll also get wind and water and all these other effects. And it's all about just bringing it home and making it real. And yes, as you said, smell is one of those things that can take us back decades to early memories. It's they call it the lizard brain is where those things register. So it's just like really visceral to us and a really powerful way to get people in the right mindset.
No, that's so fun, Avi. You mentioned a sense of awe. And this is something that's really important to immersion and storytelling, of course. And for me, so I haven't been in the industry as long as you. I started 2005. So over the past 19 years for me, there have been kind of 3 key moments where there was a sense of a suspension of disbelief, right? Where these moments of awe where my brain felt like it was tricked and there was a real magic to what I was seeing. The first was back in 2005, the first demo that I experienced of augmented reality. So at our lab at York University, we had a sister lab, Georgia Tech. And so they brought some of their tech and some demos. And it was a very simple demo. It was on the desktop computer. So before eyewear and before even the iPhone, 2005. And it was a demo that just showed this blue 3D cube. This wonderful, magical floating cube just appeared. And it doesn't sound like much, but for me, my jaw dropped. And at the time too, this was technologically super advanced, right? And so that moment for me, there was a suspension of disbelief where I thought, wait a second, there's something in my space that really isn't there. And how is this working? And for me, it was a wonderful magic trick. And, I've always been inspired by kind of the history of the moving image and the history of film and people like Georges Méliès, who was a magician before he became a filmmaker. And he brought some of his kind of tricks of the trade from magic to cinema. And so for me, that was the first moment. And then I began to just really explore and build and think, well, how can this be a new medium for storytelling, right? At that time, it was very much about computer vision and almost a focus on robotics, and content was secondary. And so I'm very fortunate to have been part of that lab where we were focused on storytelling. So that was the first moment, this really just amazing demo where there was something in my space that wasn't really there. The second moment was in 2011, visiting the Magic Vision Lab in Adelaide, Australia. It was led by Dr. Christian Sander at the time. And I tried a haptics demo. So wearing a head-mounted display and having a tool, the Phantom Stylus, holding that in my hand, I was able to see a virtual fish in front of me and then reach out and feel the individual scales of the fish. And again, this was completely mind-blowing because when you touch something, it tends to substantiate that it exists. And so here I had something that wasn't in my space, or it actually wasn't in my space, but I could touch it. And so my mind really went for a loop. And that was another kind of trick my brain moment. And the third was with Vision Pro. Even from just putting on the headset at the beginning with the onboarding experience, just the depth and the quality of the video pass through, my brain was very, very convincing. My brain was tricked again. You know, I had that moment of awe and wonder. And I think about even just being able to try some of the USDZ files. So in 2018, I launched a weekly game on Instagram and on stage at my keynotes called Real or AR. And so one of the examples from that was this USDZ file of an augmented reality sculpture from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I was able to pull that USDZ file into Vision Pro. And I'm telling you, the presence there, it felt like it was in my living room. The quality of the wood grain, just the depth, the solidity, most importantly, like the solidity that I could almost look like I could feel this thing in my space. And so it's been amazing watching this industry and this medium evolve over the past almost 2 decades now. And I'm wondering if you've had, and I'm sure you have, I'm wondering if you could tell us about some maybe similar moments that you've had that were really important to the progression of your career and seeing these things in your space that may not have been there, that it just inspired awe and a sense of suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, I have many of those experiences I share, some of the same ones with you. But I think for me that I was, well, just to start that off, I got into this in the first place because I wanted to make movies. I wanted to tell stories, right? So I totally resonate with what you're saying there. I just found the tech wasn't good enough. The tech sucked. And so it's needed 30 plus years of work to try to get it to the point where finally maybe we can go back to making movies. And now everybody can. So now there's a whole new set of problems, which is how do you get your movie out there and get people to see it when a million other people are doing the same thing as you? But that's for another show. The experiences I had that were really powerful to me were, one is not even so much being in a headset, because the headsets were pretty awful, except for the Disney one. They were generally pretty bad. There's another way to do VR, which is a cave environment where you're surrounded by rear projection screens. So that's what we had built. That was the demo that got me hired at Disney, was building a cave-like experience that we called a virtual environment theater, and having a little puck in my hand that could steer the virtual hot air balloon. The magic for me wasn't the fact that I saw 3D graphics rendered, because I'd seen plenty of that. It was being in the middle of it and being able to go wherever I wanted to go and drive it. And we were able to unlock that same magic experience for a whole bunch of Hollywood producers. We took the whole system down, played it on a movie screen in a theater for Hollywood directors and producers. And all of them were like, yeah, I've seen CGI. That's what are you showing me? And then I put the puck in their hand and say, you drive. And then they were like, oh, that is different. I can control this. And that was their first ever experience with something that was like VR. And it can be really profound. So that's one example of just getting agency, getting the ability to control what you see. On the Disney project, I had one where originally everybody had their own giant SGI computer dedicated to their seat, their headset and their motorcycle seat that they're sitting on. And I was able to get the performance of the system up so that we can run 3 of those people on one machine instead of 1 per person. Now, all of a sudden, you could see the other people flying around. It was almost a bug, because you should have your own ride. You shouldn't see 2 other people flying around the streets of Agrabah on magic carpets, but you could initially. And it was pretty amazing. Like, oh my God, this is what multiplayer in virtual worlds is going to feel like. Even though I only see a headset and a carpet and some hands, I don't see the body. I know there's a human driving. I can see that it's being driven by a human, and it felt really magical. And this was before I think almost any other multiplayer VR that I could have tried. I mean, there were a few games that were multiplayer, but it wasn't the same, right? The games were rigid, like Tron life cycles. You can turn left and turn right, but it wasn't as immersive, right, as this was. So that was pretty amazing. On the HoloLens, our very first demo was, as you said, cubes in space. You put on these glasses. Originally, we used the Loomis glasses with what's called an IMU. It's just a sensor for telling how you rotate your head. And all of a sudden, the cubes stay put in space. You're looking around, and wherever you look, there's a few hundred cubes around you. And it was magical to everybody who tried it because they'd never seen that before. Like, we just made a bunch of cubes real in our space, but they're translucent because it's not full. It's not. There's no opacity there. But that was magical. And that gave us a great idea as to what to work on next. So I started working on opacity, of course, to try to figure out how to make these cubes solid. Same experience when I put a virtual movie on the wall. Watching a movie of the day would have been probably the original Avatar movie came out around then. So that was the big movie that was going to help sell 3D home entertainment. Is again today, but it was the first Avatar movie then. And just putting a virtual movie screen up on the wall felt magical. I mean, there's no screen. There's not even a piece of cardboard. It's just literally the wall. And I see a movie screen and I can have it be anywhere I want, as big as I want. I'm like, okay, that's amazing. Of course, limited by the field of view of the headset, right? So that's one of the reasons why you want to move to something much, much wider field of view to get that immersive experience. And had a bunch of those experiences that I can't quite talk about yet, but on the Apple Vision Pro, I had in the course of developing this, and we never used that word. It was all code names, right? But having experiences of things that you can see today, let's say, feeling copresence for the first time in a really profound way, right? Feeling immersed, feeling the quality of a really powerful movie in high resolution. All those feelings are incredibly impressive when you get them for the first time. Yes. And they're enough to get everybody, excited about going off and building something. And it happens at every company. For every successful project, they're not always successful, but for every successful project, you can point to the early stages and say, there was a stage in which everybody got to see something for the first time and they were blown away by it. And that's what sustained the product through many, many iterations and cycles and money and people and all the things that have to go into building something for real. We all feel the magic. And in fact, the most important thing in my job, circling back to your first questions, is as you discover the magic when you're prototyping, don't lose it. Yes. Make sure that whatever you do, keep the magic going. If you change something and all of a sudden it's less magical, go back to what you had before and then try to move in a different direction, because the magic is what you want everybody to feel when they try it for the first time. And if it stops being magical just because you've tried it so many times, customers are going to feel that too. It's going to turn into a paperweight. They're not going to keep using it. So you got to figure out what makes it magical every single day, why it becomes a device and an experience that you don't want to live without. You can live without it, but you don't want to live without it.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you talked about maintaining the magic. That's something I was going to ask you about. And it's something that you did talk about in episode 1 in our bonus content. So our viewers and listeners can go back to that if they want to hear more on that topic. And it seems like one of the primary reactions people are having when they try Vision Pro for the first time is that they say they see the future of computing. They're experiencing the future. Now, they're appears to be a bit of a gap. This is a Gen 1 product, so that's something we do have to keep in mind from the, today to the point where we will be using spatial computing as part of our daily lives. I mean, we are seeing people using this as a productivity tool. It's something that we've seen people say, okay, I'm getting rid of all my monitors, my computers. This is it. I'm using Vision Pro for productivity. And then there are others who are a bit more hesitant. So talk to us maybe about that gap and when we will see spatial computing become part of our daily lives.
Yeah. And, we always like to joke in the industry, 5 to 10 years or 3 to 5 years. Those are the two things you'll always hear. Yes. But here's how this works. And I want to be clear. I didn't, name the product, and I don't speak for Apple. I've been out since 2019. But I think there's a reason they called it the Vision Pro. And I think that this product is targeted at professionals. Yes. So professionals who work in spatial computing, but also professionals in other fields who need spatial computing. So there's a lawyer I know who's made this become his desktop now. He's gotten rid of his monitors and he's using this all day. And then there's other people we hear about. They're like, yeah, no, it's too heavy or whatever. I don't want to wear it all the time. And they're not ready to jump on yet. That is totally normal. So this, like you said, is a first product. It's an amazing first product and a high-end one at that. It has all the bells and whistles and most of the features you'd ever want, but it is called Pro. And so I don't see anything wrong with somebody saying, I don't need this yet. That's okay. The part where they say this is the future, to me, is the most exciting part, because the whole reason I got involved with this was to try to help map out the future and lay down a path with our eyes and gaze tracking, and with our hands and with our mouth. All the natural user input stuff is stuff I've been working on personally for 10, 15 years, maybe even longer, because it's so important to get to that place. It's so important to get past the roadblocks that we've been in for the last 50, so that we can get to a much more intuitive and natural place. Ultimately, those features are also the same features that make it usable by anybody. Like literally almost anybody can pick this up. Even if there's accessibility concerns, they can swap things in and out. They can use their hands instead of their eyes. They can use other devices if they need to. But will somebody jump right away? Will somebody pay $4,000 or $5,000 for an early entry into this space? A lot of people won't. And that's totally normal. The same exact thing happened with the iPhone, right? iPhone came out. Most people, including me, say, I don't need that. I'm fine with my flip phone. It does everything that I need. And if we were to look at a graph of the iPhone progression over the years, it's about a 10-year rise between then and now, where it finally became ubiquitous, where smartphones became indispensable. And there's a point about 3 or 4 years in that I like to call the confidence moment. And it's different for everybody. It happens at different points for everybody. But there's a point at which you see enough other people using technology that you have not yet adopted. If you're not an early adopter, you've seen them use it. They've gotten good results. They like it. They let you try it. You're like, okay, maybe I will switch over and use this. It will happen, I think, for everybody. And again, not predicting the future of Apple or speaking to any unnamed plans, but the fact that this is called Apple Vision Pro kind of implies that there might be other products that aren't Pro in the future, right? I think it's a safe guess without knowing what they're doing. And what forms those take, I could speculate, but I won't. I'll say this, that I think in general in the field, where we need to go to really reach people where they live is with all-day wearables, things that are light, things that are almost like glasses, that are things that you could wear without anybody noticing that you're wearing them. They're not going to stand out necessarily in a crowd. They're going to be almost invisible, but they're going to give you some of the most important superpowers that these devices can give you. And I think somebody's going to solve that problem. I don't know. I won't say exactly who's going to solve that problem, but somebody is going to solve that problem, and it's not going to look like ski goggles. It's going to look like normal glasses. I think it's most likely going to be optically transparent, not video see-through. Video see-through is a very good solution for today because it gives you an amazing experience. Unachievable today in a smaller pair of glasses. You couldn't get quite the same field of view. You can't get the opacity that you get, which is being able to render the color black. Why is that important? Well, what you mentioned before about seeing your USDZ files rendered properly. In order to render those properly, you have to be able to mix the pixels from your object and the world perfectly and draw shadows on the ground and draw highlights and know the lighting of the room. All these things are really hard to do still with optically transparent glasses. But at the end of the day, the reason I'm confident that the optical one is going to win is because, and this is again maybe 5 years out, is because we need to see each other's eyes directly, right? I think it's a really hard problem to be able to capture the eyes and reproject them onto the front of the glasses, as the way they're doing with they call it eyesight as a feature. It's a really hard problem. It's good, but it's not perfect. But just wearing a normal pair of glasses without any tinting whatsoever is pretty much perfect, right? That's the kind of, you can't do much better except to maybe get rid of the glare on my glasses to be able to see my eyes and to see how I'm emoting. And so, 10 years out, I think we're going to be looking at something that looks much more like this, like what I'm wearing now, and much less like goggles. And that's not to fault what Apple's doing. You got to come in with the first product. It's got to be successful. And you want people to be blown away by the experience, which I think they've ticked off all those boxes. But what you don't have to do in a first product is make it be something everybody wants immediately, because it takes time. No matter what you do, it's going to take time to build. And there's so many issues that need to be worked out. There's things we've talked about already with privacy, with the safety of eye tracking, with the fit. Just dealing with the number of different variations of people's faces is enough. So a project I worked on at Amazon called Echo Frames, they don't have a display. They have audio in the glasses. So they have microphones and speakers. But just solving, make it beautiful, make it something that everybody wants to buy means you already have to have a whole bunch of different forms of the glasses. It's not one size fits all. All our faces are different. And so on Apple Vision Pro, you see that manifest as drop-in lenses and different face adapters, because it's really hard to make one size fit all. And other companies are like, whoa, we need different styles. I mean, I think Facebook, in many ways is lucky that they were able to use the Ray-Bans, because it's kind of an iconic style, but not everybody wants to wear Ray-Bans. Certainly not everybody wants to wear sunglasses indoors. So if you buy the sunglass version of it, you're not going to wear those all the time. And if you buy the indoor version of it with your prescription, you're not going to wear those outdoors. So how do you make something that works indoors and outdoors all day long, that lets us not have to have separate sunglasses, but it also accommodates our prescription and it fits perfectly? I mean, these are all really, really hard problems. And I've written multiple articles about how hard those are and how long it's going to take to solve. So nobody should feel disappointed, I think, with Apple's first product, that it is an amazing entree into it. And if it only succeeds as a developer platform to get us to the next level, that's more than enough to help get us to the next level.
Yeah, it's amazing. But you were talking about the design, right? I mean, just the design of Vision Pro aesthetically too, it truly is, it's a thing of beauty. So when we're talking about developers then, what advice might you have for developers, designers, even artists, creatives, designing experiences for Vision Pro?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, having prototyped many experiences early that I can't talk about, I'd say the best first thing to do is to just try whatever seems interesting. Like try things that haven't been tried before. You may learn that they've been already tried somewhere in secret, and a lot of people have tested those out and sort of paved the way. Hopefully, with Apple's put out some really good. The Human Interaction Studios put out some guidelines to tell you what works, and that's because you can imagine maybe they've tried things and figured out what works and doesn't work through lots of experimentation. Those guidelines are a great place to start, but I think the most important simple guidance I can give people is less is more. That AR is most powerful when you see the real world, because you're nauseating people the least, right? The more you show the real world, the less likely they are to get tripped up by anything. And they're seeing their own space. They're seeing their own body. That's the most natural thing that we can think about. And add just a little bit. Don't take over with everything being immersive all the time. That should be a special experience that you dial into when you want to go immersive and watch a movie or be at Joshua Tree National Park as your desktop, as your background. I say desktop, that's the old metaphor. The new metaphor is you're in Joshua Tree Park, seeing all the stuff around you. We need a new word for it. It's no longer your desktop, and it's not your home space either. It's just your default environment, I guess. So less is more, and make it fit in with reality as much as possible, so that you are adding to their normal everyday experience, but not dramatically changing it. And I think this is why you've seen Meta make such a big change in what they're doing. Like 2 years ago, they're like, metaverse. Everybody's going to be in these foreign spaces of really boring meeting rooms with other people dressed as cartoon avatars. And that's the vision that they put out there. And like, this is not the same vision. This vision is you should be in your space. You should be where you're most comfortable. We want to bring the other people to you. We want to bring the experiences to you. And as a designer, you should be thinking like that too. Bring the world to me, to the customer, whoever's using it, and only the parts that we want and need, and not overwhelming us with all sorts of noise and backgrounds and over-designed crap. Focus on simplicity And what you see in the interface is Apple has taken that philosophy to the nth degree, that their interface is focused on minimalism and simplicity. And there's many ways to do something for accessibility purposes, but you just need to find the ways that are most natural for you. And then hopefully it's just super intuitive and anybody could use it. That's the mark of a really successful sea change in the way we interact with computers, is that people just pick it up and use it.
I agree. And you mentioned a couple of really important things, especially around cognitive overload, simplicity, and minimalism. One of the things that I say when designing for AR experiences is to really make reality the star, right? Yeah. We can use AR, but the big question is why? How is this going to enhance the moment? How is it going to enhance the customer's experience? How is it going to extend their reality in new ways without hindering or obstructing the real world? And I think that's really key. And you did mention cognitive overload, and it's something that we've talked about in the past, this idea of calm technology. So calm technology was a term coined by Mark Weiser in the 90s at Xerox PARC in Silicon Valley. And it's this idea that technology recedes into the background. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't hinder. It appears when needed. And this is something I talk about in Augmented Human as well. And it's something I really do see as the future of spatial computing, of principles of calm technology being applied when designing these experiences. So anything you want to say about calm technology and maybe what that future looks like?
Yeah, you bet. And also, I guess, shout out to our friend Amber Case, who
Yes.
Does a ton of work promoting and diving into what it means to have calm technology. So read her work. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the inspirations for wanting to use eye gaze, hands, voice, is that the more that we're able to understand, that used to be called affective computing, where the computer
Yes.
really understood your emotions as well. And there's been a lot of people who worked on the AI side of that. And there's a huge overlap with spatial computing. The goal is that the computer understands what you're trying to focus on. And it's one of the reasons to have eye tracking, is that we know all these notifications are all intruding and taking away your attention from the thing that you want to focus on. And so let's not do that. There is a time and place to interrupt you. And that's usually when you're naturally switching gears. So if I spend an hour writing a document and I'm done, I'm coming up for air, now is the time to show me the unimportant notifications. And if it was important, if my child went to the doctor, I need to, immediately jump off what I'm doing, yes, interrupt me. But most of the time, the notifications can wait. They can wait until we have time to process those and not interrupt us so much. So you can see Apple has already tried to build this into the operating system a lot in different devices. There's focus mode, there's all sorts of things. But now we have the sensors to actually tell when you're focusing, yes, to tell when you're concentrating, and to hopefully respect that and not try to constantly grab your attention. And I want to contrast that with the companies whose business model it is to grab your attention, to keep you addicted and doom scrolling and liking and subscribing and all that stuff. That Apple's doing the opposite of that. That are trying to help you to stay focused when you want to be focused. And the most powerful version of that, I think, that I can imagine is, again, back to Copresence, is the sense of all the people we might ever want to talk to are all there. They're all connected all day long. But how do we talk to them at the right time in a way that we're not interrupting each other and ruining that flow? But you do want to have these social interactions. They're super important to both work and social life, to be able to engage with people. And we saw a real lack of that during COVID, where everybody had to resort to hour-long Zoom meetings to try to recreate the feeling of being in the same place. We should be figuring out, as a next evolution here, how to be in whatever place we are. And here I'm a big fan of remote work, like to be home, but also feel like the people that we need to see are available to us, even asynchronously. And it's something I've spent a lot of time working on at Microsoft and Amazon, and potentially I can't quite say what I did at Apple, but it's been a track for me over the years, and I think we're not done yet. I think we need to get to a place where people can pop in from our contact list and talk to us in the same way that they can text us and message us, but it less distracting, less pulling us out of the world, and more like we're in the space together, but also more calm and more respectful of our time and what we do. So this is the key burning question of how do we stay connected to those people but not have them interrupt us all the time, right?
Yes.
That was probably one of the principal problems for those of us who have kids, who when working at home, was the kids needed a lot of attention at random times. And that became a difficult thing for most people to juggle. And so maybe technology can actually help us instead of hurting us in this way if it understands us better and it's used and applied to improving the quality of life as opposed to overwhelming us with ads and notifications and bombardments of information that we just don't need all the time.
Yeah, you bet. In the past, you've given a really wonderful kind of design example of how calm technology could be applied to spatial computing. It was a scenario around meetings and clocks. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a practical example of where something can be calm and not divert your attention. So we're all used to being in a meeting room somewhere and there's a clock on the wall. And eventually someone's going to go look up at the clock, and that's a signal, or multiple people will. That's a signal people are getting fidgety and they're bored and they want to leave. What if we got rid of the clock but had another way to figure out when the meeting was supposed to end? So let's imagine that's something like sunrise and sunset. So the walls of the room start out a nice salmon color in the morning and early sunrise, and then the virtual sun gets to sort of midday, halfway through the meeting. And then, and it doesn't have to be a literal sun, but it could just be the coloration on the wall, gives us a sense of sunset towards the end of the meeting. You don't need to look at a clock. Everybody will intuitively know where we are in that meeting and when we're starting to reach the end of it without ever having to glance up at that obtrusive device on the wall. So don't just, back to the advice for people, don't just create a better clock. Get rid of the clock. Get rid of the meeting room. Get rid of all the things that we don't like and that get in the way, and figure out a better alternative using spatial computing that gives us a more positive experience of other people and enhances them. So that means people shouldn't be looking down at their watches or their keyboards or looking away all the time at their distractions. We should enhance communication and understanding. And so now AI is getting to a place where it can start to understand what we mean and make those things real. So let's play with that. Let's talk to the AI as we're having these meetings and have it actually fabricate the things virtually that we're talking about. And we can use, as long as it's not distracting and it's helping with communication, that's going to be a big boon to communication, because half the problem sometimes is, what did you mean when you said that?
That's
well,
right.
Maybe the AI can know us well enough to know what we mean. And here I don't mean ChatGPT. I mean, we're going to eventually need AIs that are trained on us so that they know what we mean when we say something and can translate it into someone else's lexicon. That's not a generic AI that's been trained off the internet. That's an AI that is your personal assistant that understands you. We haven't seen any great examples of that yet.
So on that idea of AI and a personal assistant, going back to that article that you wrote for Vice, The Eyes Have the Prize, there was a special kind of personal assistant that you wrote about as our kind of protective assistant. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the future, right now you have a router at home that kind of acts as your firewall to the internet. So you can reach the internet, but the internet hopefully can't reach you because there's a lot of bad actors out there. So what we're going to need in the future is something you could call our personal firewall or a personal AI shield. But it's not just blocking packets of people trying to get at our information. What it means is, on our side of the wall, we have all of our personal information and all this information that some AI has been trained on, right? So this AI needs to be on our side of the wall because it's all private. It's all stuff that could be exploited very easily to manipulate us. And so we don't want that to happen. We want it to only be on our side. But on the other side, on the outside of the wall, some little slice of that AI is perceiving the world around us, digital and real, and protecting us from scams, from advertising. Like AdBlock is the simplest version of that you can imagine today, which is not even an AI. It's just a pattern matcher that says, oh, this rectangle in this browser looks like an ad, so I'm just going to replace it. What would you replace it with? Personally, I'd replace it with personal photos. As you walk around the world, billboards should become your own family photos that only you see, because why do we need to see the billboard? I don't care about that stuff.
You remember Steve Mann did that with mediated
totally.
reality? Yeah, where there'd be billboards, and he said, no, actually, I need directions to where I'm going. So that billboard would immediately turn to those directions. And then later we saw Julian Oliver, an amazing artist and friend, do something called the Artvertiser, which was that then replacing those billboards with artwork. But sorry, I wanted to just bring those things up.
Totally. And it should be clear that those are our personal displays,
Yes.
Nobody else in the world needs to see that stuff. And it's the same with directions, right? The people have depicted the metaverse as people getting navigation lines on the ground. Well, other people should not see your navigation lines because those are private to you. So that's something you would only see in your personal display. That comes on our side of the firewall. On the outside of the firewall, we still have to be careful because just a quick example, if you were to do a query on your phone, show me all the restaurants around me, you've given away your location. You've gone and done a spatial search that you're at the center of. And as a result of that, other people know where you are and they can track you. And it could be anybody. It could be governments. It could be companies. And they do, and they sell that information. Even the cell phone companies sell that information ordinarily. What we really want to do is have a firewall that says, no, that's private information. So part of this personal AI shield is figuring out new techniques to hide, to obfuscate our details, to merge them in with everybody else's details so that the people who are trying to track us can't, but we can still do what we want, like ask for where the good restaurant is and get that information. So we need to design this and build it. And the question is, who's going to own that and who pays for it? Who does it work for? If a product like that is built by a company that's trying to advertise to you, don't trust it because they're going to use it for the advertising purposes. But if it's something like a company like Apple, I would trust it because I'm buying, even though the product may be more expensive, I'm buying it and it's supposed to work for me. It's not working for somebody else and I don't know who they are. It's working for me. The company has actually engineered it so that their own people can't see the details of what I'm doing with it. It's private by design. And there's a few companies like that think that way. I think under Tim Cook, they really moved in this direction. And it's important. That's one of the reasons I joined in 2016 was I saw what Tim Cook was doing with privacy and standing up to the government and respected it. We need to figure out better business models that are sustainable, that allow products that always work in our interests. And it's sort of an adjunct to comm technology. I'm not sure even what the right term is. We have private by design, but I think we need a word for when technology works for us instead of against us, right? Yes. For someone else's benefit.
Yes. And so that's what this personal assistant, this personal AI, this personal protector is, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I should go start that company now because it's going to take a while to get it built. And I'm like, yeah, I guess we're getting pretty close to that time where this thing needs to exist. When everybody has these all-day wearable AR glasses, we're going to need that company to exist. And maybe some of the big companies will do a good job at this and maybe they won't, but we're going to have to go figure this out.
So we are coming up to the end of the episode, and taking that you're in the hot seat today, a question that you love to ask everybody is, what is the question that you haven't been asked, but you would like to be asked? So Avi, I'm asking you that right now. What is that question?
It kind of follows on the last thing we said, I guess. The question is, if somebody gave you $1 billion, what would you go build with it? And the answer is probably I would go start that company and go build this personal AI shield. But maybe it's something that needs to be built separately from glasses because it needs to work across everybody's glasses and not just be tied to one piece of hardware. But I think it needs a first piece of hardware as well. It needs that first instance of proving to people's satisfaction and comfort levels that this is going to be a good thing and it's going to be something to their benefit. I would love, to find whoever wants to work on that and to get going on that. So the first question would be, what does it do? What does it look like? And how does it behave? And I have some of those answers already, but I think some of those I'll leave as open questions for design in the future. But I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about what it should or shouldn't be. And that's probably a good place to leave that question.
So we're going to manifest this for you. We're going to have a company reach out to you, throw $1 billion at you. You're going to make this happen. How can people get in touch with you?
Great. So the easiest way, if they're interested in sort of the ethical side of all we're talking about here, is to come join the XR Guild. It's a very down-to-earth organization. We have monthly video chats and meetups and things like that, where you get to talk to other people who feel the same way as you about these issues, if you agree with a lot of things that I've said. So just go to xrguild.org. And it's currently free to join. And we may have dues in the future. We actually just voted on something around that. But we'll also have a non-monetary way to join as well by volunteering and donating some of your time. So it's a great place to join to talk to people like me. And I'm just one of the people there. And I probably won't even be the one running it in a few years. We'll have other people come in and take over. So that's one place. And if you're interested in the consulting side of things, I have my work site is called realityprime.com. And that's where I've been consulting on and off for the last 30 years, That's just the name that I use for my solo consulting business, and so you just get me. There's not a lot of staff there, but I'm ready to help people with various interesting projects that they need to go figure out, and on LinkedIn. And for you, Helen, I think we should also take a minute to talk about what you're working on. I think your main gig is speaking, and so you're bookable as a speaker for coming inside companies and helping to explain a lot of this stuff to companies, to talking about your book and future directions as well. So why don't you tell us about how people find you to book you, and as well as how do they find your book?
Oh, thank you, Avi. Thank you so much. Yeah, been doing keynote speaking for the past 18 years. I love it. I love engaging with audiences on stage and helping them see the future of a lot of these new technologies. So I can be booked at speakers.ca, my speaking agency, and also you can find me at arstories.com. And I also do a lot of consulting work in the space as well, and advising companies. Most recently been working with luxury brands on what this future looks like. So thanks for that. I'm going to get back out of the hot seat and go back to host seat. And thank you for being such an incredible guest. You've made such an amazing contribution to our industry. So thank you for your 30 plus years of service. I can't wait to see what you're going to do next. And again, a massive congrats to you and the entire team at Apple on Vision Pro. Bravo. What an incredible achievement. So thank you so much. Love learning from you. And thank you, Avi. Yeah.
Thank you. I will humbly accept that, but pass the kudos on to the team who stayed longer and worked harder through COVID to make this thing happen. It's an incredible set of people. I can't say how many, but they're all great and they're all important. And I'm lucky that I get to talk about this stuff, and some of them can't, but they all really deserve the kudos for a really good job well done.
Yeah, bravo to everyone. And thank you. And we'll see everyone in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Bye.